This is the Inclusion Conversation. I'm your host, Grace Young Foster, founder and CEO of the Inclusion Initiative. I'm an adoptee, I'm a foster care alum, and I'm passionate about elevating our communities. It's time we're included and visible in the conversations about work, careers, and just life. Let's be visible and let's be loud. Join me now. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Inclusion Conversation podcast. I'm Grace Young Foster, your host and CEO and founder of the Inclusion Initiative. It is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And we're continuing our guest series honoring this month and really highlighting some incredible adoptees and fosters who have Asian heritage. And so wanted to welcome my guest today, Katie Mooney. Hello, good to see you.
So good to be here with you.
Thanks so much for making the space, taking the time. You are an incredibly busy leader and professional in your space. And so we're really honored to have you here.
Thank you.
And so Katie and I met, we are like, I think, LinkedIn world, perhaps just the adoptee constellation world, where we ended up starting to connect virtually. And we've met in real life, which was really special. And I just found that I had such a, just that unspoken connection with Katie, with you. Maybe it has something to do with being an adoptee, right? Maybe, right? And so we've just kept in touch these last 2 years. And now I'm thrilled that you're going to share some of your story with us. And we get to learn from your insights as a DEI professional and leader, which is super exciting. And so before we get started in our conversation, I just want to introduce you to our audience a little bit. So Katie Mooney is an accomplished diversity, equity, and inclusion, parentheses, DEI leader and thought partner with expertise in driving strategy and growth of diversity and inclusion change management, planning, and programs. Katie is highly regarded for her ability to establish trust and personally connect with her clients, as many respect and look to her expertise, as she is intentional on the development of long-term relationships and partnerships. That's exactly right. And Katie is the managing director at Seramount, which is an incredible company. So welcome, Katie. Super impressive background. And I would love to start our conversation with you just letting our audience know, what is it that you want us to know about you and your story?
Goodness. Well, thank you first, Grace. And I think actually what connected our constellations together in network was I needed to find out more about the Inclusion Initiative. When I saw that, I said, what is that? What is happening there? And more importantly, like, how can I be involved? So thank you so much for your continued work and advocacy. I'm truly honored to be with you and this May and AANHPI Heritage Month. It's interesting a little bit about maybe the origin story or my adoption story. I was born premature, requiring immediate hospitalized care. My first days of origin were set up that way, then leading to foster care, and then finally an adoption in the 1980s from South Korea to a privileged, which I acknowledge is not a right and is not earned, but a privileged middle class family where there was physical safety in my neighborhood, food security, socioeconomic support with parents who told me this is the blueprint for success and put a real strong emphasis on a future in one which in this family you would be highly educated. Interestingly enough, though, about the story, I remembered when I would ask about my origin story or maybe the sequencing events that led me to be adopted, I felt both parents kind of immediately came back to me with a talk track around, well, you were wanted by us. So immediately there was this like realization that my biological parents abandoned me.
Mm,
And they told me that in that instance, I am not good enough or I do not belong. So you take this through your kind of early childhood and it manifests in different ways and different experiences. I remember in primary school, predominantly white teachers, white curriculum, I would say majority white students, and children who are just, I would say, even vicious or mean. And even my yearbook, I remember a boy wrote to me, "You should just shave your face in my yearbook," because I had darker hair. I remember that. And then my parents, I think, best attempt to helping me try to understand Korean culture, we went to summer immersive, what they called Korean culture camps at the time.
yeah.
And they're wonderful spaces, theoretically, where people who look like you, who are trying to learn, come together as adoptees. I get why they existed. But it was odd to me because I was spending time, whether it was learning Taekwondo or learning Korean lettering, for example. There was never any ongoing curriculum the rest of the year to support my interests. And it was actually quite unsettling and even uncomfortable because it felt like we were all kind of rounded up together for 1 week in the summer and then we never saw them again because this is so before cell phones, social media. And so we never got to like continue those connections we made. I then asked my parents to be moved into high school outside of my specific zoning, one that was more diverse, a school where, you know, I could meet other students and friends who didn't necessarily look like the kids I had gone to primary school with. And so here I am now in this space where I realized I wasn't Asian enough. I couldn't speak to the norms, the culture, the language, relate to the after school and evening scenarios of my Asian friends in their homes. And then finally, when I finish and kind of think about my adoption story, there was even unintended exclusion in my own family, probably unconscious, for sure, unintended from my childhood. But my mom always referred to my grandfather as her father. And that went through into adulthood. Just recently, my uncle passed away, and it was my brother is dying. So that language has always told me that I stood as an other, I stood as an outsider, which is maybe some explanation why I'm not particularly close with that extended family, as they've just kind of come these people I just know. So interestingly enough, through childhood, this narrative I'd been told around, you are so lucky. You could have had it worse, being poor, orphan, being with, you are so lucky because you were given privilege, which I understood years later that that statement to be actually true needs a lot of context.
I'm just sitting here thinking about like how many of us have a shared, like maybe not exact experience, right? But we all know what that felt like to be like told, "You're so lucky. Just
You're so lucky.
be
Yes.
quiet. Don't complain. Don't strive for more because you're lucky. You're lucky to just be here." And we all have a fundamental right to exist. And so telling an adoptee that they're lucky to just be here, like it almost is right negating our human right to just exist. Hearing your story, man, those emotions and memories and feelings of being told those things all flood back, which I'm sure they are for
Mm-hmm.
you as you're sharing. And so
Absolutely.
can you share a little bit about, right, like how you came to navigate through that?
Oh my goodness. Well, I've still carried some of the, I would say, effects of you are so lucky. Inside my own professional journey, as you mentioned, I am incredibly lucky that I was in the Smithsonian many years ago. It's the beautiful art galleries of Washington D.C., and I'm in specifically the portrait gallery, and I'm in an exhibit called "Struggle for Justice." And I'm sitting there, and I'm in financial services at the time, truly doing like risk management in finance, and I'm sitting there on a weekend and I'm staring at icons in our American social justice and civil rights history. I knew the Martin Luther King that was exhibited there, the Rosa Parks, but there were so many icons on these walls that I didn't know. And they were staring back at me essentially. And so I sat there for a really long time and trying to understand, why am I having this real visceral reaction? And it led me to really do some introspection that, you are an adoptee, you identify as a Korean American woman, you've had a gay parent, you've married a man that is Korean and African American, the things that these icons fought for us to have some of the liberties we have even today, acknowledging it is a very tumultuous external environment right now, but there are still some of the liberties that I have had that added to the privilege that I get to live my life today. And so these icons essentially kind of sent me, our ancestors, almost like an invisible baton. And it said, what are you going to do with it? And I said, goodness, I think it's not risk management. I think it's actually going to be this work, which we now call diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's even a name that continues to evolve as of the time of this podcast. But being able to be at Seramount and being able to have an incredible esteemed career with experiences leading this work in Fortune 500, in consultancies, and being able to support, and currently today Seramount supports about 600 partners in advancing and doing the work in inclusion every single day. It's not lost on me that I have this extraordinarily purposeful work, and as it has offered me a tremendous amount of opportunity and success. And it's interesting because in the call to action, was also rooted in being a workaholic, working nonstop, finding that my purpose, my ability to lead and support people who do this work was going to be this ongoing rigorous cycle of just obviously intent, effort, expertise as I led this work. But I realized so much of my identity that was rooted, I thought, yes, it's purpose, but it was actually my need to belong.
Yeah.
It was actually my need to be a workaholic so I could be viewed as valued.
Yeah.
And it's those moments when it was truly that trauma of abandonment where I said, oh my gosh, you've got to keep going because you have to show your value because you're not good enough. But it conflicted with the fact that here I am in this dream job. People always said to me, you are so lucky that you found a career that doesn't feel like work because it's your passion. And so you are so lucky. And then my trauma from abandonment led me to ignoring feelings of exhaustion, fatigue, burnout, all because there it was again. You are so lucky.
Yeah. I have had similar ways of moving through my professional journey as well, of really leaning and being everything to everybody, especially in the workplace, to belong somewhere and to, like you said, be seen as valuable, be seen as someone that deserves to stick around, right? And not be fired, let go, whatever, laid off because I didn't bring enough value, right? And like, especially if, you mentioned you're not as close to some of your family, right? And I'm not as close to mine either. And when you have that disconnect, right, of attachment essentially to people that should be reinforcing, right, your value, that you're worthy because you are you, like that you're enough. When you don't have a lot of that personally, you pour everything you got in professionally because there are like the tangible benefits, the immediate gratification. I get to keep my job. Maybe I get the promotion. Maybe I get the raise, or I get the accolades from my boss or my peers. And so it just becomes this reinforced constantly learned, constantly fostered behavior in the workplace
Yes.
for many, many adoptees and fosters too. And so what you're saying is really, really, really resonant. And I really appreciate, right, that you are in the, and let's say it out loud, right? Diversity, equity,
Equity and
and
inclusion.
space.
Yes.
Because what, what our community has really, what I have seen as a gap, which is why the inclusion initiative exists, right, is really the inclusion piece, which impacts the equity piece, right? At work for including adoptees, including fosters, including people with this lived experience through this child welfare system, right? And how that shows up for us every day in our lives, but also in the workplace. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about how the wanting to please show your value, you know, almost honoring that you're so lucky when
Yes.
really you just
Yeah.
have a right to exist. Like you have a right to
Right.
exist. And but talk to us about other ways our lived experience kind of shows up at work.
Yeah. So I have to really give the renowned physician, Dr. Gabor Mate, true honor in the just years of research that he has done related to trauma and connecting it with my own holistic care provider, opening up what trauma is helped me see it in so many ways, that trauma from my abandonment story. So as Dr. Mate would say, trauma is a physiological wound sustained. And so if you think of what a trauma is, it's a wound, and a wound is raw, and if you touch it, it hurts. So my trauma in abandonment, anytime I'm reminded of that, you're not wanted. The raw, you do not belong. And so whether it's tomorrow or decades in the future, it stings just as much today as it stung when I had originally incurred it back to my origin story 40 years ago. And so when we call like them trauma that triggers, it's because that wound is touched or activated. So where this shows up for adoptees and fosters in the workplace that is not talked about is when it triggers, I'll use abandonment in this case for me, performance reviews. I have always been riveted in anxiety leading up to, in many instances, strong, very strong, exceptional performance reviews, time after time again. But the earlier days were, I was riddled in anxiety and stress. And it was because I was so deeply needing to be validated.
Yeah.
And I would look at the great things maybe that performance review said, but I went to the opportunities first because those were the things that stung. It was the things that, whether it was things I could absolutely continue to develop, the skill sets, I just saw it as you're not wanted, you're not good enough, you don't belong here. So that's one way it shows up.
Yeah.
The second way of you're not good enough, you're not wanted, how many times have I been interrupted in a meeting? How many times has somebody taken my idea in a meeting? I'm not visible. I'm not good enough. I don't belong. It stings. Or when we think finally of not being selected for a coveted project at work, not being part of that dream team, not being selected or invested in by Mr. Mentor or Ms. Sponsor. Like there it is again. Here it is. I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And so those things that had happened in my earliest days, for people who are trying to, as we kind of say, own your career, it isn't one where I independently solely can own my career when I am struck by sometimes the bounds of so many traumatic wounds that get activated from many of our daily practices inside of corporate America. So I think it's valuable for corporate America, for our benefits, for our folks to really understand that there are real impacts for people internally, psychologically,
Yeah.
that can actually cause harm.
Yeah, 100%. And it just leads me to think about this word that you've touched on a few times, which is we want to belong. We want to belong because it validates, right, everything else that we're valuable. And you also talked about not being visible. So true for adoptees and fosters. That identity for us is never, ever visible because there's no place to share it. There's no place to elevate it. There's no place to really talk about it without it just kind of getting weird and uncomfortable.
It's so true.
And, we haven't created that space or framework, especially in corporate America, to address and really honor that lived experience for people. But at the same time, right, and especially depending on the industry that you're in, but being an Asian person can be extremely visible. So you're like so visible in one aspect. However, for me, being transracially adopted, I was adopted into a white environment. The Asian spaces were not something that I could really play in and relate in well. And it was very obvious that I was, quote unquote, an imposter because I didn't understand anything about Asian culture or heritage or the nuances or, the immigration experience of Asian families, right? I was an immigrant solo, first gen, being placed into a home and family that completely did not reflect me at all. And then growing up in a culture that was not of my origins or heritage. And that was just so clear, right? I would get all the time like, oh, you're not really Asian, or wow, you're so American. Like, well, yeah. And at the time, right, I would be proud of that. Like, of course I'm American,
Of course.
And looking back, right, it's like, oh gosh, I missed so many opportunities to really like dive into richness and culture because I was so keen on being so white. And anyway, right, the not being able to belong there, but physically I was told and pushed like, oh, you belong in the Asian group. Here you go. No, I don't. And then I don't belong in the white group, clearly, right? I don't belong in any of these ERGs, affinity groups, either at work, school, the community at large, you name it. I just never could belong in any particular way. And so I was always in this weird in-between space. So talk to me a little bit about that for you.
It's interesting. I think where we get it really right, and at least in corporate America, is the acknowledgement of heritage months. And when I think about corporate environments and acknowledging AANHPI Heritage Month, you kind of mentioned like representation was so important and it so mattered. And it can really be a fuel when you have diverse storytelling, when you have icons who have led the way. It helps you in spaces, back to your original question of when we may feel othered or when we may feel over representation of the dominant norm, and navigating through those spaces. It's the representation that so matters, and it's important to me. And so, I want to share a little bit more because in that spirit of representation that mattered, it really showed up for me. Fast forward, or actually rewind back to about a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago, and I was watching this movie, Joyride. It was on a Saturday. It was meant to be this lighthearted comedy. Four friends go on a whirlwind adventure together throughout Asia.
Four Asian lead. It was great. Anyway, go ahead.
Correct. And I won't give it away, but there is this real compelling adoption story for the main character. Her name's Audrey. And as you follow along throughout this movie, here I am Saturday morning laughing with pure joy because it's hilarious to ugly crying on my couch. And I called a fellow adoptee friend of mine from my childhood and we basically said, we need to search. We need to search for my biological parents. So thankful
Oh,
for
it
this.
catalyzed you into a birth search. Whoa.
It was this beautiful creativity, the storytelling of the director Adele Lim, she was also the writer, and Lionsgate Pictures for creating this film that essentially changed my life. Representation mattered because I could actually activate on a need I didn't even know I had in that moment. So I guess you could say in this case, yes, I was so lucky, and I really do actually believe that. And so it initiated a search. And so, unfortunately, the search had become a bit inconclusive at this moment in time. And it was interesting because I was okay with that. But then recently, I was just kind of re triggered and maybe even re traumatized.
Mm.
There was recently in the New York Times and, of course, so many other media outlets this acknowledgement of the South Korean government and the government's, I mean, there was scrutiny around the practices of adoption in the 1980s. In short, it was kind of revealed that there were these false documents, inaccuracies in verification of identities, inaccuracies in parental consent of those who choose or chose to let their children go to the adoption or foster care system, and maybe even a little bit of the acknowledgement of greed and colonization practices that were part of an incredible amount of Korean adoptees that essentially were adopted to many different countries in the world. And so it was interesting because here I am now, a wound, staring at this birth paper, the very few little I have, looking at this name, looking at this area where I was born and going, is this all real? Was I potentially taken from biological parents? I will never know. Was my premature birth status, the need for healthcare, immediately kind of rejected because I needed healthcare somewhere else? Was I a burden to South Korea? So many things had come back up together. And interestingly enough, some of these things have connected to this kind of part of, depression, anxiety. Even sometimes I have this like mild agoraphobia, which is fear of leaving the house. So I acknowledge the significance also of May being Mental Health Awareness Month. But these things began to show up every time that wound was touched. And so interestingly enough, it was truly understanding that my body was always going to reject or say no when I felt that type of wound being essentially reopened. And so it has always been a part of my story. And it's interesting because when we think about whether we lead incredible high performing organizations, and the honor to do that every single day is huge, where we overwork ourselves because we need to belong, we need to be that talk track. I'm so lucky to have had the textbook Hollywood story of adoption. It's something incredibly interesting because what ended up happening is I've actually have acknowledged through years of care that I've been suppressing my needs. My body had said no from the day I was born. This idea of you're so lucky has caused me, even as a child, to not even know what I needed from my parents. So it isn't their fault, but I would have traded the tennis lessons, the horseback riding lessons, the new clothes from Nordstrom in September. I would have traded it all for lessons that help support my care, my curiosity, was able to cater to my psychological and intellectual needs, and just a richer sense of knowledge in where I am from. So it's been so interesting in how it's manifested in probably all areas of my life, from that simple moment of that origin story.
Yeah.
And of course, me having to kind of pull away from "you are so lucky" without so much of the context.
Yeah. We say, in our communities all the time, we say, both things are true. We are lucky,
Absolutely.
but we're also allowed to have all these other feelings. They exist
Absolutely.
in the same moment. They exist for the same reasons, and we're allowed to voice all of it. So I
I
think,
agree. And the awareness of that is the power that you get back.
yeah,
And that is so true. You both things, exactly as you just beautifully said, can absolutely be true. And so what gets your attention determines then your direction. And so now I've got agency and power, instead of being kind of stuck in just "this is the way it is" or "that's just life." It doesn't really have to be that way, but healing is possible.
yeah. And what I'm hearing, right, is you are really owning your own narrative around all of this. You are
Yeah.
finding what your voice is through finding what your needs are, through you are relinquishing the "you're so lucky" narrative, and you are empowering yourself with
Mm.
your own, like being true
Yeah.
to how you feel and what you've
Yeah.
experienced. And it's important for not just adoptees and fosters, but anyone with lived experience to share that doesn't fit the standard narrative of what we all hear or want to believe. It's so
Yeah.
important that all of us do that. It's a critical piece of your DEI work. Like that's what you are
Mm.
encouraging people to do professionally, through each other, to empower themselves, to
Yes.
celebrate themselves, and to recognize that we all deserve to exist and we all have value simply because we exist,
Absolutely.
right? And so
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you sharing your doing a birth search, which I have not done, but I have heard many, many accounts of it. I mean, it's super intense. So I don't want to like brush over that. It is a very involved, intense process, both mentally, physically, and emotionally. And it is not something that people often go into lightly. There's a lot of thought behind it. There's a lot of preparation that you need to do mentally to go into it. And so I really, I'm just, I'm happy for you that that is something that you've explored and are continuing to explore. But I just want to acknowledge that that's really hard. You're finally maybe going to learn the truth of your story. That is freaking scary. Like for me, that is a
Absolutely.
scary thought, because this story I've carried for over 30 years of my beginnings, it's just so much easier to just spit that out and then brush it off
You're so right.
than to
Hmm.
think about, oh gosh, my whole story might change. And so it's amazing that you're doing that, and it's really brave, and I commend you
Thank
for
you.
it. But I also think, like, yay to celebrating your heritage, your identity. It's great. It's really great. But it's
Hmm.
super hard. I don't want anyone in our audience to think that this is a light, just purely joyful thing. There's a lot of complexity behind birth searches.
Absolutely. Or that we're done. We're
Yeah,
always going to continuously evolve.
exactly. It is a journey.
It's a
It is a
journey.
journey. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so being a leader in the corporate DEI space, seeing everything you've seen, understanding the structures and policy of so many large important companies, what would you want us to know, right, or to practice in terms of allyship, both for the Asian community, but just the community at large, all of the intersectional identities that we carry, but everyone deserves allies in the workplace, no matter what we look like or where we come from. I'm really curious to hear what you think how we should practice allyship.
How we should practice allyship. Well, one is hopefully that it becomes just the practice rather than us even needing to call it allyship. That is kind of one. Two is that we have more curiosity and more empathy to really understand that our whole life experiences shape our colleagues. When we talk about them bringing themselves to work every day, it is them bringing their life experiences to work every single day, which are all going to be different. It's actually the beautiful tapestry of how we all come together to create a mission that is aligned to make innovative products, or a mission that is aligned to solve for patient disparities and give people access to care. So I invite more of the questions, more of the curiosity. I would say for my fellow kind of DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion colleagues, thinking about how might in allyship we talk about identity-based groups, intersectional-based groups, whether they be, neurodivergent, and whether they be women, whether they be, those who identify LGBTQ, for example. Those are kind of the, what we're hearing more of.
Yeah.
But as we think about more of the other intersectional identities, first generation, maybe origin story not in North America, for example, or place of origin, I'd like to see that an adoptee foster could be a representative group or affiliation in support of those. And not necessarily just the story of those who have been adopted or have been in foster, but those who have foster children, who have foster or have adopted children. So I would love to see that for our organizations, just so we can bring a little bit more to the surface. I think build some of the benefits and care that people need, but then not also forgetting, kind of back to what we talked about, these kind of standardized norms of, annual performance reviews, of manager check-ins. Every single time you might defer a check-in with me as an early career professional, every time you might cancel a meeting, every time you might have a different selection process for that, high performing, critical, code red team, know that you might be actually doing a lot more of a sting potentially to those who have different life experiences, and they run across the gamut. So just being really mindful that there is, quite frankly, more to the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is on us, right, to be active in trying to learn, but we also need to provide spaces for people to be able to voice.
Absolutely.
It goes both ways. And so, yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that and bringing that up. And, also I just want to plug too, like, in terms of benefits and just some support, right? We have some of that for adoptive and foster parents. There's a workplace support in forms of leave, in forms of help with fertility, or help with, when you adopt or foster a child.
Right.
And I just want to challenge, right, people in decision-making positions. Well, think about the kids that have the experience of being fostered or have the experience of being adopted. What are any benefits, right, that you could maybe provide to that demographic of individuals? One of the key ones you mentioned, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. One of the key ones is mental health support.
Absolutely.
Basic mental health support that really is focused, right, on the lived experience of people that have been through these systems and situations. That's really a need, because the parents are working for you now, but these kids are going to grow up and then maybe want to follow in their parents' footsteps and work at your company.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the
Absolutely.
resources you're providing them too? So I want to make that plug. And
Well,
I think,
and your Gen Z kids, or even obviously as we moved into new generations that will eventually be in the workforce, I think they're going to tell us exactly what they need if they want to work there.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know. I love the mindset of Gen Z. I really admire them actually. And then Katie, what does it mean to you to be Asian American?
I think about in being Asian American, the ability to have an affiliation to a rich culture that is immersive, truly, of my own lived experiences, the things I'm still learning about Korean culture. I think the ways in which I have built community, like with you, in being beautifully Asian American. And those are some of the, I would say, main pieces that make this experience so incredibly, well, truly where I am lucky. So I think that's a little bit about the Asian American experience for me.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And now, if it's okay, I would like
Okay.
to transition us to our rapid fire segment. As we talked about, we're more than the surface
We
of what
are.
we look like or what we're initially bringing to the table, right? So let's
Okay.
get into it.
Okay.
All right. Favorite food.
Ooh, favorite food. Interestingly enough, maybe this is back to that meaning of what it means to be Asian American. I am the very first. And I think even my husband will almost like put his head down when banchan comes. So the Korean kimchis and things that accompany a Korean meal.
Yum.
And I'm saying, we're going to need more of that. I'm just going to let you know at no expense, add up the surcharges. We're going to need more of that. So I would say that is where, and sometimes as we joke about lightly and lovingly, of course, me being adopted, he does the, oh, you're so Korean. And so that is exactly, I would say, one of the most favorite things. And also, I'm sure he also puts his head down as we leave H Mart, and I've got this big jar for a home of two. So I guess I would actually have to say being Asian American is that just innate need for kimchi.
Yeah, and all the pickled vegetables. Yeah, like
All the pickled vegetables. It's
totally.
good. It is so good for you and your autoimmunity. It is the thing. And even I said to a gentleman I met the other day, we were talking about like emergency preparedness. I said, oh, okay, so good. We'll go actually dig in the ground and make this kimchi. So, I mean, it's a survival strategy as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you'll be like to your husband, like, you'll thank me. You will
You'll
thank
thank me. Yeah.
Next time he says you're so Korean, you're like, damn right.
Yep, that's right. Unapologetic. We're
Unapologetic.
unapologetically Asian. I love
Yep.
that.
Okay, and what is your superpower as an adoptee?
Oh, my superpower as an adoptee. I would say seeing below the surface,
Yeah.
hearing and knowing that what you see, it's like that iceberg. There's so much depth to people, for example, and having enriching conversations, asking curiosity questions, getting to the deeper part of that iceberg and seeing the beautiful kind of different tapestry of someone's kind of dimensions, their experiences, their life. So I think you can't be in this work if you don't understand truly the depths of people.
Yep. 100%.
So I can see below the surface.
I love that. I think that is absolutely your superpower. And what did you dream of doing when you were a kid?
Oh,
We didn't talk
goodness.
about this.
So I dreamed of, and I don't know if, I mean, I think there's pieces of it that sometimes I think comes up again, but I wanted to be a broadcast journalist. There was a woman in Seattle. I adore her to this day. Her name is Lori Matsukawa. And similar to Connie Chung, they were Asian women that told me I could do that.
Mhm.
And so I think I definitely had the hairbrush and would practice telling the news, of course, just as young as a child. And even sometimes when I'm on stages and having conversations like this, where I'm the facilitator or I'm having kind of the questions of curiosity, I feel sometimes like and I always think about it like my inner Lori Matsukawa, my inner Connie Chung. So I get to do a little bit of that. So I'm glad that too, that is part of my purpose driven work.
Yeah, I love that. I can totally see that. And never say never. It's not too late,
Never say
you know?
never.
And then what's one thing on your bucket list?
Ooh, one thing on my bucket list. I would say a family trip to Korea. So John's family is Korean and has just quite frankly a very big group that is all kind of ready to go. So we are in hopeful planning stages of when we can go as a family. And so that could be something really special I'm looking forward to.
Oh, that's amazing. And would that be your
Yeah.
first trip back?
It would be my first trip. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I love that plan. To be surrounded by
Okay.
people
Yeah.
who love it and care for you is really
Yes.
great. And then final question.
Okay.
What is a piece of advice that you want to share with our audience?
Every moment that I've ever felt maybe a little bit of that sting of imposter syndrome, maybe every time I felt that self-doubt, every time I felt that feeling of like, am I worthy? Am I of value? Are people seeing me truly as an expert? Just a kind of that sting of insecurity. And we know where that comes from because we just talked about it. But whenever I feel that sting, I look at myself and I kind of hear this in my voice. And I've said this to so many: be so good, they can't deny you.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you are so good in your craft, in your art, in the way in which you convey a thought, the way in which you complete a work project, the way in which you lead an organization, if you are so good, no one can deny you. And that's the importance, I think, to Grace, when you talked about of just being.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's lovely. Thank you. That is such sound advice. And I really appreciate you being here with us and sharing with us. So thank you.
I am so honored to sit with you, Grace.
This has been a lot of fun. And I want to just point out, if people want to get in touch with you, they can do so through LinkedIn. I will drop the links in our show notes. But how else might they follow your work or get in touch?
Of course, if you're interested in support for your inclusion strategies, of course, myself, my team, Seramount.com, hello@Seramount.com. LinkedIn's a great place to be. And I'm hopeful there's a katiemooney.com website coming soon, something to that effect.
Oh, yay. Okay. We'll be on the lookout for that. And Katie is an amazing speaker and presenter. So if you're looking for someone with her expertise, the intersection of her lived experience, please hire her.
Thank you.
Yes, we wrap up our episode. If you're a fan of the show, please like, share, and follow us, The Inclusion Conversation. And thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed the show. Please subscribe, share, and follow us. Check out our show notes to know where to find us on social. And our website is theinclusioninitiative.com. If you're an adoptee of color or a foster care alum and you want to join our professional community, it's free, by the way. Hit me up via DM, or you can find our email in the show notes. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.